Ceremonial law and moral law. Some have separated the law in the Bible into two groups, ceremonial law and moral law. Let's take a look at how the Seventh-day Adventists distinguish between the two. The ceremonial law, they say, is the book of the law that was written by Moses, which was later nailed to the cross. The moral law, they say, is the Ten Commandments, written by the hand of God on the stone tablets, and it is eternal. The ceremonial law was placed beside the ark, while the moral law was placed inside the ark. The moral law, which they say is the Ten Commandments, are the following. Do not worship any other god. Do not make any idols. Do not misuse the name of God. Keep the Sabbath holy. Honor your father and mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not lie. Do not covet. Adventists teach that the ceremonial law was nailed to the cross, but not the Ten Commandments. But what of the following commandments, which were written in the book of the law, but were not written in the Ten Commandments? Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Deuteronomy 6:5. Thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:18. It is widely agreed that the Adventists teach that the ceremonial laws were nailed to the cross, and that the Ten Commandments were not, and are still in effect today. But if that is the case, what does that mean for the two commandments I've just read? Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Deuteronomy 6:5. While thou shalt worship no other God is in the Ten Commandments, this commandment is not. Thus, according to the differences mentioned earlier, it is not a moral law. If it is not a moral law, then it must be a ceremonial law, unless they have a third classification of law. However, I have never seen an Adventist claim that there are three classes of law. So thus, we must conclude that Deuteronomy 6:5 is a ceremonial law. Since it's a ceremonial law, and the ceremonial law was nailed to the cross, that would mean this commandment was as well. If that is right, then that means we do not need to love the Lord God, because the commandment was nailed to the cross. Ah, but we do have to love the Lord God, don't we? What about, thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people, but thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:18. This is another commandment that was not written in the Ten Commandments. Thus, according to the differences mentioned earlier, it is not a moral law. If it is not a moral law, then it must be a ceremonial law, unless there is a third classification of law. But again, we haven't heard of a third classification of law, so we must conclude that this is a ceremonial law. Since it's a ceremonial law, and the ceremonial law was nailed to the cross, this commandment was nailed to the cross too. If that is right, then we no longer have to love our neighbor, because the commandment was nailed to the cross. We no longer have to follow it. Ah, but we do have to love our neighbors, don't we? These two ceremonial laws were considered the greatest commandments of all the laws and the prophets, greater even than any mentioned in the Ten Commandments. I know the Seventh-day Adventists believe that you must love the Lord and your neighbor, so don't get me wrong. But according to their knowledge of the ceremonial laws and the moral laws, they actually have these two laws I've just mentioned nailed to the cross, as they are not written in the Ten Commandments and placed into the ark. Colossians 2:14 says, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. Seventh-day Adventists believe that the ordinances mentioned in this verse are the books of the law, written by Moses, and not the 10 Commandments. Since the 2 greatest commandments were not written in the 10 Commandments, and not placed into the ark, and were part of the books of the law, they just nailed them to the cross by their own words. They can deny it all they want, but their own understanding does it, not me. Can you honestly continue to separate the law this way, and use it to determine what was nailed to the cross, and what is still in effect today? Or is there possibly another way to determine what commands to follow in the new covenant? I'll let you decide as you weigh the evidence presented in this video.